we will be going through information the next 2 hours on recent trends in noncompliance. Unfortunately, and you probably already know this, that what we see, I'm an auditor as well as a trainer, and what we find when we go out both domestically here in the US and internationally is whenever we engage an investigational product or bring together an investigational product in a human subject population, we tend to have some weak points, meaning globally, we tend to have issues with control of the study, with oversight, with protection of participants, either through safety or informed consent. So as we move through this, think about what's happening within your own company, within your own country. Think about what it is we might do and work towards doing as an industry to bring compliance as a whole. Because as we look at these findings, we're going to talk about what happens from an FDA perspective if things are not as they should be. But what happens with that? How do we handle that? What's the best approach? And being mindful that all regulatory authorities are looking for voluntary compliance. They want to see us working towards compliance because ultimately the goal and the product, if you will, of good clinical practice is that credible data from protected subjects. So as we look at these trends in noncompliance, we are going to talk about what they're finding. We're going to look at some of the FDA letters. Now, MHRA and Health Canada a bit too have started putting out some letters to investigators and what they're finding, but really pulling it back to the FDA warning letters that really highlight how they tie in those regulatory responses. How many of you are familiar with, maybe not intimately familiar, with FDA warning letters, but have read them before? Could you give me a green check if so, please, for GCP? Okay, so some of you have. Right, so we're going to take a look at some of them, and in one of them, unfortunately, I had personal experience, and I'll explain that to you. And it's just important to understand when you communicate with a regulatory authority, it's good to know what you're supposed to be doing. So we'll talk about recent FDA, EMA, and Health Canada findings for inspections that were conducted. I also put some PMDA in there as well. Some of these countries are not as forthcoming with their information, so we do search for the newest stuff where it's provided. Sometimes at presentations, we do have updates from FDA that came out just a little while ago, so we'll talk about those. And as you would guess, they haven't changed too much over the last several years. We'll look at areas of compliance concentration for those regulatory agencies as we discussed. We'll talk about what factors may be helping drive the present approach, what it might mean for future compliance situations and considerations. So what are we seeing from a regulatory standpoint? What's changing? What are we seeing in our industry as a whole? And how are regulatory authorities going to respond to that and require us to respond? We'll also look at best practices for responding to that regulatory communication, should that happen to you.